Hi folks, and welcome to another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. My name is Mike Dobbs. I'm managing editor with Reminder Publications, and our guest today is Rick Sullivan. And if you don't know who Rick Sullivan is, then you haven't been paying attention to politics for the last 20 years, because his resume is pretty impressive. He was the mayor of Westfield for a number of years. He was the state secretary of Energy and Transportation? No.
Environmental Affairs.
Environmental Affairs, Chief of Staff for Governor Deval Patrick, and now, since 2014, the President and CEO of the Western Massachusetts Economic Development Council. Thanks very much for doing this, Rick.
Thanks for having me.
So, for those of us, well, I should say, you know, one thing I get to be as a reporter is professionally ignorant. So I can ask all the ignorant questions. First of all, let's describe what the council does, because I know you guys do a lot of different things. I'm not sure if the general public is thoroughly aware of what you guys do.
Sure. So in a big picture look, it's really a driving force to develop Western Mass from an economic development point of view. So we get behind initiatives that are going to be good for growing the economy, creating jobs, creating wealth in the sense of providing those jobs and providing career pathways for families, individuals to move into the middle class, to kind of sell the region as a place to grow your business and to come and locate here. Certainly we think it's attractive from a place to come and to live and to raise a family. And we have opportunities right now for jobs. But the council also does take positions on kind of the larger issues. Some would say public policy issues or even political issues in terms of what are those issues that are important to the quality of life for the region, and how do those further economic development. So you'll see the council lead on things like transportation and energy, public education, public health sometimes, so those larger economic issues.
Okay, well, you say energy, and let's just start here. Under the Patrick administration, there was a great push in the Commonwealth to increase our solar energy, and we saw solar field after solar field developed. I mean, here in Springfield, for instance, we had the huge solar field in Indian Orchard on property that really couldn't be developed for any other purpose. Do you see this, has it been continuing? Is it something in Western Mass that we could do more of? And is it something that the EDC is trying to encourage?
We certainly have encouraged it, and we certainly have some members that have been leaders. Mass Mutual, you know, the Big Y, you know, have been very, you know, leading in terms of that. Eversource and many of the energy companies are, in fact, members of the EDC, and again, been leaders there here in Western Massachusetts. I do think it will change, and actually, back when I was secretary, we did change where the incentives were. When the first programs came out, it was really, as long as it was solar, it was pretty much incentivized. We changed the regulations back when I was secretary and changed those incentives. So we took some of the incentive away for the large fields. We were not really looking for agricultural lands and open space lands to be developed with solar, but we increased or gave full incentives for things on landfills that you know, needed to be capped. It was appropriate. Certainly anything that was on a commercial building or small residential and in those harder to develop areas, but we moved away from just kind of the open field because again, it's that balance between the environmental benefits of solar and also not wanting to take away the character in terms of the large open fields, recreation spaces, and farmlands here.
Do you see this continuing? I mean, we've had a switch from the Patrick administration to the Baker administration, naturally. Is this something that is continuing in the state? The
Baker administration, you know, has followed through on most of the, particularly on solar, but, you know, on a lot of the renewables. Certainly, they moved forward here on hydro. They just came out with an award that's working through the process now. They've been active in offshore wind. So they certainly have carried forward, as the governor refers to it, as a combination platter, him and Secretary Beaton. And I've actually gone down with the secretaries, the three secretaries that were the energy secretaries during the Patrick administration, and stood with the governor and supported, you know, his move and his energy bill about a year and a half ago. So they have moved forward. The governor has moved forward on that front.
So, you know, To me, 2018 is a pretty interesting year for Springfield when it comes to economic development, because we've got Union Station now open, something that happened at the end of 2017. We got the Chinese rail car company up and running, providing about 150 middle-class union jobs.
Yep.
And we're about to have our neighbors here to Focus Springfield, MGM, opening in September. So I've asked this question to a number of people, and what is the next act for Springfield in the region when it comes to economic development? Because for years we've been working toward those three things. Right. Now what's next?
So I think that there's a number of things that are next. I think that one of the biggest economic development opportunities we have from, particularly the CRC project and the MGM, is connecting our local companies into their supply chains so that they're doing business with MGM and with CRC, because those dollars stay here. They stay in this area, they employ your neighbors, they contribute to your local charities, your Girl Scouts and your Little Leagues. Those dollars here will just grow and multiply locally. So I think that is important to continue those efforts. And I will say MGM and CRC have both been active. MGM has been extremely active in trying to make that happen. I think that there's an opportunity because of those jobs and because of what we have here in Western Massachusetts in terms of a competitive advantage in terms of cost of living. It's an opportunity to look to grow the region from a population area, because not only is it a great place to come and to live and be affordable to live, but we have opportunities here in jobs that are good paying jobs with career pathways. I think there are other companies that can be attracted in. You've seen Falvey Linens in particular that's come here to do business, and you will see some others that will come with the Chinese rail. So I think there are other growth opportunities there. I just am also a big believer that when you have momentum, it is, that's easier to play off of that because success kind of builds on success there. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a region, and not just the city of Springfield, to sit there and say, okay, where can we play? What are the sectors that are not already overbuilt where we can have centers of excellence, and start to focus on some of those sectors. So whether we're talking water technologies, where UMass is a leader. There's only 2 clean water drinking centers in the country, one in Boulder, Colorado, the other is in Amherst, Massachusetts. Leaders in clean energy, and the EDC ran an event last year up at UMass, sponsored by the Clean Energy Center, where we focused on water technologies, building technologies, and battery storage and solar, where we could be leaders. We also ran an event with Bay Path University focused on cybersecurity and the leading work that Carol Leary and they're doing there, as well as, again, UMass and Smith and Mount Holyoke, and the investment of $15 million by MassMutual into the big data and cybersecurity fields. Those are areas where Western Massachusetts can be leaders. And so we need to take that momentum that's in that buzz that's kind of out there right now and show where we can play in other sectors.
One thing about the Chinese railcar company, and you just mentioned it, how we want them to interact with local businesses. And I think a lot of those local businesses would fall into our precision manufacturing sector, of which Western Massachusetts is now nationally, if not internationally, known for. But at the same time, I know that the precision manufacturing folks here are having a problem with personnel. Yep. That even though these are solid, middle-class, reliable jobs with a clear pathway in terms of a career, they are not attracting the number of people that they need to attract to adequately grow. So has the EDC been involved with any of those efforts to try to get young people into training programs that would lead them to these types of careers? We
have, and that is absolutely the biggest issue, not just for manufacturing, but quite frankly, in most of the other sectors. It's looking to find the workers that are needed to fill the jobs. And Western Mass is not alone in that. You've seen the stories. Boston's having that problem. It's really a problem across the country. But we have absolutely been very active, particularly with manufacturing, but with some of the other sectors as well. And working closely with Dave Cruz and the people at the Regional Employment Board. And I think CRC is an example there that they worked closely with STCC. They also work closely with Putnam, and in fact, in their first round of hires, they had individuals that were matriculating through those programs that they hired. You're starting to see a model out there, I believe, which will be successful, where the company has a need for their employees, and they will work directly with the community colleges, sometimes with the four-year colleges, but with the Voc Tech schools in the region, which is another center of excellence for us here in Western Massachusetts, and develop a curriculum. You've seen it with Gulfstream over in Westfield in aviation. They've worked closely with the Westfield Academy and Westfield State University to create a curriculum which, that class is full and oversubscribed. Never a guarantee of a job, but it is a sector that has openings, and so it's a career pathway that will be successful, and those are good paying jobs. I mean, those, you can have entry-level jobs at Gulfstream for $75,000 a year. I mean, in Western Massachusetts, that's a good middle-class income. You've seen, as I said, CRC did it with Putnam and with STCC. You've seen MGM do it with not only STCC in gaming, but they've very close working relationship with Holyoke Community College around foods and hospitality and culinary, and there was a contribution to the building over there at Cubic. So that has kind of become the model, and the National Machine and Tooling Association has always had a good working relationship with our Voc Tech and our community colleges in particular to get in and help develop that curriculum to show. But the conversation in manufacturing really needs to start even earlier in the middle schools, and quite frankly, a conversation with parents that they need to understand that these are good jobs, and manufacturing today is not what you may have thought what manufacturing was, being on a dirty machine floor, and it's not your grandfather's manufacturing anymore. It's high tech, it's a lot of IT, it's computer, it's clean. And they are good paying jobs. So the conversation has to be that, the American dream, can be in manufacturing and maybe should be in manufacturing, because I absolutely agree with you. It is not only a calling card here in Western Massachusetts, but it's really the invisible backbone of our economy here that doesn't get enough play, mostly because our manufacturers, for the most part, are smaller or medium-sized companies, where if you could put them all together, they would be one of the biggest companies in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But it's a lot of, still family. We're very lucky there, still family owned, but small in numbers. So sometimes the voice isn't heard all the time. And so I think that falls upon organizations like the EDC to start to have that conversation more robustly, to say, hey, these opportunities are here, and they're really good opportunities. These are good jobs.
I know that I just saw a report that popped up on my Facebook feed about that we really, as a nation, need to start thinking that not everybody has to go to college to get a bachelor's, a four-year degree, that there's, we really do we've gone through this whole period in the 60s and 70s and 80s where vocational education was considered second class to getting your bachelor's, and of course, it's not. Especially if you have your bachelor's in, ancient history, and you're sitting there waiting for the plumber to come. Guess who's more important right then?
Well, and again, the plumber's making a pretty good living, I mean, so there has to be a very different conversation, which is why you've seen, organizations like Tech Foundry pop up that, really focus on IT, where it's like, okay, maybe you don't need that four-year degree, but you need specialized training, or as they say, you need a badge to be able to do a certain thing, and they give you that specific training, and then you can get into a job and have a career pathway. It's why EDC has led on the issue with our grant from the Boston Federal Reserve, who recognizes that in Springfield, again, particularly, there are a large segment of the population that does not participate into the workforce that should be into the workforce. So there is a real focused effort on being able to bring them in, understanding that, to bring the population which has been in poverty for a couple of generations, you're going to be bringing them into those entry-level jobs, but being able to get them the skills that are necessary to get those first jobs. So we're working hard on trying to grow the workforce that way as well. And I do think that, quite honestly, in Western Massachusetts, we need to be able to grow the population to fill some of these jobs as well. We need to work hard filling from within, and we're doing that, but we also need to, let people know that there's jobs and opportunities and a real, quality of life here in Western Massachusetts.
Well, I certainly agree with you, but those guys at Amazon don't agree with us now, do they? Because, you know, if I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the EDC and other folks in Western Massachusetts thought that the idea of Amazon having its second headquarters built in Enfield, Connecticut would be not only a benefit to Connecticut, but also a benefit to Western Massachusetts, simply because from an employment point of view, Enfield's right across the border. And it certainly would have been a game changer for Northern Connecticut and Western Massachusetts if it had made the final 20. And before we started rolling tape, we were talking a little bit about that the final 20 were places that anyone would have thought someone would have put a huge corporate organization in, and there were no surprises. So were you surprised by the final 20 when it came out?
No, as we were saying before, you know, I think you and I in about 5 minutes could have picked those 20 and been right on. You know, we did, you know, I have to say the mayors all got together the morning after the announcement came out from Amazon. The EDC gathered the mayors and is like, okay, anybody have any sites that, and you know, the specs on this were just enormous. And you know, nobody had anything that really, in fairness, you know, checked all the boxes that would be a viable alternative. So we looked and, you know, needed to do something as a region. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why the organization of the Knowledge Corridor was created, was to make it a large enough metropolitan area that we had the number of employees they were looking for and the space. Certainly focused on our colleges and universities, the 41 that are in that corridor, which are important to any of these corporations, that connection between higher ed and their organizations, not only for research and development, but going back to the talent development, is matriculating through these schools. So the Enfield proposal came up. And it was right there, and we do recognize that we have at least as strong an economy north and south as we do east to west. So, you know, it did get some attention. I do believe it was unique in the sense that as far as I know, it was the only multi-state proposal. So we did play to what Amazon said they wanted over there in terms of being creative. You know, that obviously wasn't the case, because I don't think any of the 20 are really way out of the box, you know, thinking, and certainly not bringing the opportunity that you and I talked about, which was to really redefine and you know, grow a region that would have been so impactful from an economic development and standard of living point. But you know, it was a good exercise. We did get, as I said, all the mayors together. We got the colleges and universities came together to play a role. And I do think moving forward that, you know, while we were not successful in Amazon, it was a very good exercise, because we can create the template that tells the Western Mass story for the next company that comes along, that, you know, we have a much, you know, more realistic chance of landing here as a company. And for everybody to pull together, when you look at the region, it is a great story to tell, you know, with certainly your economic centers, but when you get into the Hampshire and Franklin counties and you know, what they bring to the table in terms of, you know, recreation, outdoor recreation opportunities and the companies that are there, you know, it is a great story as a region, and that's the story we need to tell more.
Just, if I remember correctly, it was going to be like 50,000 employees?
Oh, yeah.
And you know, I was just trying to wrap my head around what the parking lot was going to be like in terms of, all right, if you have 3 shifts even, how many parking spaces you need. So this really needed a huge piece of real estate. Right. And I'll be very curious to see if we ever find out wherever the top 20 they decide to land in, how much they're going to have to pay for real estate. Let's say if it's in Boston, to get the amount of real estate that they need, at what price is it going to be? Whereas out here, that's one of our advantages. We've got space that is much more affordable for manufacturers or for businesses to come to.
Absolutely. I mean, and that goes back to the cost of living, cost of doing business. We can be very competitive, you know, on those fronts. You know, finding the 50,000, which is why we needed to be part of a larger metropolitan area to be able to satisfy that 50,000. But, you know, while I'm really familiar with the Boston site, because it was originally proposed as one of the casino sites back when I was the secretary, so I've done some review of that. You know, there's not a game-changing aspect to that in terms of, you know, they're going to come in and remake a region. So it works, and I hope they're successful. I'd rather have them be successful than some other part of the country. But I do think that the proposal we put forward was pretty compelling, you know, as being creative and really working as a region. I think that spoke volumes.
All right, here's an oddball question.
Love
Are we ever going to see another commercial air carrier at Westover? There was that point where we had that company carrier that was out of Columbus, Ohio.
Yep.
And I thought, well, this is really cool. I mean, we've got a little bit of additional transportation resources, and it's in Chicopee. We don't even have to go down to Bradley.
Right.
Is that ever going to be a possibility again?
So, I mean, the infrastructure is certainly there, including the terminal. It's all still there, and Mike Bolton and his team over at Westover Development, they do a great job, and they are certainly chasing the ones that make sense. I do know that they've had some conversations over my tenure here with some carriers. You know, it is usually looking for that carrier that's going to doesn't want to play in their bigger markets, and you know, it's obviously going to always be kind of a low fare and a limited run in terms of what cities that they go to. But yeah, I think that the opportunity is there. I'm not going to tell you I got one in my back pocket, but Mike and his team are active on that front.
Cool. Speaking of transportation, I know that tomorrow at the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, they're going to be having a MassDOT public hearing on the rail plan.
Yep.
And that rail plan does include the proposal for a study of east-west passenger rail. And I know that our legislative delegation and Senator Lesser are very excited about the fact that this is even in this rail plan and that it might move forward. We've had development of north-south rail, yep. And come May, we're going to be having the Connecticut Commuter line coming into Springfield, which means for those of us who might want to go to Hartford for something and we don't want to drive, which includes me, I hate driving into Hartford, this gives us another opportunity. Also gives us an opportunity that if we want to go to New York City and not take Amtrak, we actually have another rail alternative. We can take it down to New Haven, change trains, and go into New York City. I view that as a real plus for us. I view it as another feature, especially for younger people who may not want to drive places, but certainly want to go places, to have another alternative. We've had an increase in north-south rail with Amtrak as well. So is East-West definitely this missing economic development puzzle for us?
Well, it's certainly a piece of the puzzle, and connections, you know, both from, you know, residents where they live and then where they work, but also, you know, companies are increasingly looking on how, you know, that movement all takes place, and we don't have that quick connection. And I do think that ultimately, whatever the passenger rail side is, it's got to be truly high speed and it's got to be reliable. And there have to be options to it. You can't run just one train with no options because people need to have the flexibility. If you miss your train, you can't stay someplace for a year. So, you know, it does need to move forward, and it does need to be reliable and fast. I do think, you know, it's an opportunity. I don't know that, you know, the study. You know, studies are great, but if it's going to be studied and it's going to be over that 5-year period, then realistically just kind of being a realist in terms of how things happen in government world, unless something strange happens, like ERA funding that came in through the Obama administration, it's going to sit there and realistically it's not going to happen for, you know, a decade or more because it's not going to be in the next 5-year plan. So the study's fine, although there is already a study that was done a while ago, you know, by the state, which was accepted at the federal level. So, you know, flushing that out further is fine, but so you certainly celebrate that fact, I guess, as you've seen the legislators do. But in terms of, you know, actually moving it into a construction and use phase, that's still, you know, down the road a bit.
I know Congressman Neal last year presented a more holistic plan that the feds have been talking about that would increase rail not only from Springfield to Boston, but also Boston to Providence and Hartford and New York. And so it's definitely being looked at on multiple levels. I'm just concerned that the political will in Boston is not necessarily going to be there to spend multi-millions on east-west rail. They seem to be fine about tossing millions at the MBTA. I understand practical politics, but as much as I would like this to happen, I'm not sure if it ultimately will.
Well, the other one that they've kind of got in the inventory there is also the South Coast Rail, which is Boston to Fall River and New Bedford, so which has been on the books for a while as well. So there is some realistic, there's only so much money. But the fact of the matter is that that's why it's always important for us to speak as a region. The entire legislative delegation has to make, it a priority on all those fronts, or it just isn't going to happen because the numbers just aren't there. And our delegation does come together on those larger issues, and it is a slog on every single one of those, because if you just look at it, as a numbers person, and you sit there, okay, if I'm going to spend X number of dollars, where can I impact the most people? We are never going to win that formula, because the cost benefit per person is just not going to be there because we just have less people. So you have to sell the project on its own merits, and then you have to have an administration that buys into the fact that we need to make these improvements across the Commonwealth, and not just where the number works out to be exactly correct. So I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of our fair share, or it's our turn. That was kind of the promise that was made after the big dig happened. That was like, okay, we'll look at things outside of this region. We've already obviously made a huge, and Boston's very pleased with that investment. Now it's kind of like now it's kind of our turn.
Yeah. Finally, one thing we do here on Focus Springfield's Government Matters is we talk about how did you get involved with politics. I don't know if in Westfield, it's the Sullivans and the Knappicks, and it's like politics becomes family business for you guys, for these two families. How did you get involved with it?
So just growing up, as a kid, my dad was a public school teacher and then a superintendent of schools, and public service and kind of giving back to the community was always important. Kind of little known fact, my mom did a lot of the community service and working with the open door nurseries and the YMCA's, and some of the issues trying to get a new school built, a high school at the time in Westfield. She was kind of the grassroots person. So that's kind of something that was always ingrained in us. To run for mayor, it was a decision that, quite frankly, my wife and I made together when our daughter was about ready to enter the school system. And, we looked at what the system was, and they were absolutely going to be going to public school. But we looked at it and said, there's less choices today in the public schools than when we went and had a great public school experience and education. And my mom would always say, well, if you can't complain about it unless you're going to step up and do something about it. And it was like, from the position of mayor, you also chair the school committee in Westfield. It was an opportunity to try to make those changes, that it just doesn't mean that the school needs to, look nice from the outside or have the buses run on time. What really is important is what happens in the classroom with the professional teachers and the resources they need to provide that education, to give kids choices. And that means you have to make investments, and that means those choices, when you make those budgetary decisions, you need to put your investment there in the kids into the public school system, which I think we did. But that was really the driving force as to why my wife and I decided that this would be a good thing to do, and we were fortunate enough to do it for 13 and a half years. And
then you went to Boston and served in 2 different positions in the Patrick administration.
Yeah, actually 3, because I can't keep a job. I actually was commissioner of DCR first, which most people know is the state park system and the roads and bridges, and we didn't have any trains, but I did have the Massachusetts vessel. The Ernestina is a boat. When I got it, it wasn't even seaworthy, but they're working on it now to get it so that it would actually float. So it was a great experience, and did move through the administration and ended up as
Was it any bit of a culture shock to go from a municipal government situation to a state one in terms of bureaucracy or how things are accomplished?
It was a little bit. I mean, probably the scariest thing was when I first went down for my first day of work. The DCR offices are right across from the TD Bank garden, and walked into the building and literally knew no one in the building. So for me, that had kind of just been in Westfield, that was rather scary. But the mission of DCR was great in terms of particularly the state park systems and the importance there. Ironically, there was about 1,200 employees, which was pretty much what Westfield had. The budget, sadly, was about the same as the city's operating budget. Yeah. Wow. So so the numbers and the budget, and You know, I looked at it as really as a customer service, almost like as a DPW job, that, you know, the importance of the parks is people want them safe and clean and access, and really providing opportunities for the families and the residents of the Commonwealth as a place to go out and recreate at low cost, and give them opportunities, and really, you know, being out in the field to do those things. And it's really kind of just ran it as being a mayor. So from that mindset, I think it was helpful. So I think we got pretty good scores during that 3.5 years for an agency that, quite honestly, had kind of been beaten up over the years, and really had a lack of investment. But Governor Patrick stepped up and did a lot of capital investment, in particular, you know, around here, whether you're talking Skinner Mountain or, you know, the huge project up at Mount Greylock. You know, we really did invest a lot of money in capital expenditures there.
Well, Rick, thanks so much for coming in today. This has been great. And folks, thanks for watching another episode of Government Matters.